Everyone, it's Miss Magda here to share a couple of stories about Martin Luther King Jr. So it's not virtual story time live, but it is a virtual story time. And so why don't we start with our opening song? And then I'm going to show you the books that we're reading. We'll do a book, a song, a book, and then my goodbye song. So here we go. We clap and sing hello. We clap and sing hello. With our friends at story time, we clap and sing hello. We wave and sing hello, hello. We wave and sing hello, hello. With our friends at story time, we wave and sing hello, hello, hi. Thank you for coming. Okay, so here are the two books that we have for today. The first one is My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is written by Martin Luther King III, illustrated by A.G. Ford. The second book that I have for you is a picture book of Martin Luther King Jr. by David A. Adler, illustrated by Robert Casilla. And it's going to be really, really great. So how about we get started with our first book? And no Magda glasses today, no sun stashes, because this is a very serious topic. Martin Luther King Jr. did so much for our country, and so I want to make sure that you guys understand how wonderfully serious it is, and really honor him today by helping someone out or fighting for a cause, a good cause. Okay, so here we go. My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Martin Luther King III, illustrated by A.G. Ford. This book is published by Amistad, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. My sister Yolanda, who we called Yoki, and I wanted to go to Funtown more than anything. Well, kids, you know Daddy's working very hard today so that you and all children can go to Funtown, but it's not possible today, Daddy would say. Maybe next week. But that week never came. You just don't want to take us, Yoki wailed. And finally, my mother explained. We were not allowed at Funtown. The rides and the roller coasters were for white people only. That's how it was when I was growing up, and my dad fought to change that. At home, though, my father was just that. He tossed the football with me, taught me how to shoot hoops, teased me, and played with me. He would lift me up and put me on top of the refrigerator. I imagined swinging from the ceiling fan as if I were flying in my own airplane. Then I'd let Daddy catch me as I fell into his arms. Away from home, things were different. It wasn't always easy being the son of Martin Luther King Jr. What's your name? The two older boys asked. I don't remember, I said. I forgot. I knew it was wrong to lie. Why'd you say that, Marty? My mother asked later. You know your name. It's your father's name. I knew. And I knew why I hadn't said my name. Because I was afraid. Some people didn't like my father's work. He was stirring up trouble, they said. My father never stole anything or hurt anyone. Even so, he was thrown in jail more than 30 times. He had the courage to stand up and say, this law is unfair. And sometimes he was arrested for that. Once a neighbor was driving me home from school. On the radio, we heard that the Reverend Martin Luther King and about 80 other people were thrown in jail. I was terrified. I ran inside my house crying and asked my mother, why did Daddy go to jail? What did he do wrong? My mother hugged me. Your dad went to jail to help people, she told me. Some people don't have enough to eat or comfortable homes or clothes to wear. They are not as fortunate as we are. Daddy went to jail to make it possible for all these people to have these things. Don't worry, Daddy will be coming back. I carried her words close to my heart. A year later, when Daddy was arrested again, Yoki was afraid that he wouldn't be back for Christmas. This time, I was the one who consoled her. Don't cry, Yoki. Daddy will be back. He has to help the people. He has already helped some people, but he has to help some more. And when he finishes, he'll be back. My father was not the only one in danger. Many people were hurt or even killed as they tried to change unfair laws. Can you guys believe that? Once, as I marched in a protest, I saw a pretty lady with a bandage over her nose. My mother explained that she had been attacked by a police officer. The marchers were peaceful, but that didn't stop people from trying to hurt them. Even police officers sprayed marchers with fire hoses or turned dogs on them. Pretty crazy to read about, huh? And yet, even in today's world, we have some issues. No matter how bad it got, my dad never fought back. We must meet violence with nonviolence. We must meet hate with love, he always said. Nonviolence wasn't just for marches and protests, it was for home as well. One Christmas, my brother Dexter and I got toy guns for presents. Most of the other boys in the neighborhood played with guns, and we wanted to be just like them. But we knew that guns were wrong. They were not toys, they were machines made to hurt and kill. Together, the whole family took the guns outside, made a bonfire, and destroyed them. That night, as my brother and I watched our gifts burn, we sorry, we believed we were destroying all the hate in the world. One bonfire couldn't fix everything, but some things were getting better, like the law that kept black and white children from going to the same school. When I was in third grade, that law was finally changed. My mother told Yoki and me that we'd be going to a new school in September. I didn't want to be the new kid who sat alone. Yoki felt the same way. We don't want to go, she complained. We complained. We don't want to be the only black kids in school. That struggle is real. My mother said she'd see what she could do. That day before school started, we found that our three friends, the Abernathy's, would be going with us to the Spring Street School. I was glad to have my friends and my sister with me because when we got to school, there were flashbulbs going off, and TV cameras everywhere. Why did reporters want to talk to us? We were just kids going to school like everybody else. But those of you who know the history know that this was a huge deal. And they weren't the only ones who encountered a lot of photographs and people just like being in their face. We were each in different classrooms. It was strange to be the only black kid in my class. I felt like everyone was staring at me the whole day. One kid even made a nasty comment. Wouldn't you rather go to school with your own kind? He asked. Why aren't you at your own school? We're all the same kind. We're all kids. And the Spring Street is my school now. My father fought for us to be just kids attending the same schools. It was what he meant when he said he dreamed of his children being judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And that's it. That's My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Martin Luther King III, illustrated by A.G. Ford. And now I'd like to share a song or a song selection with you guys. And I'm going to try to see if I can get them into the comments or into the captions so that you guys can sing along. And a lot of you might know the song. This became the anthem for that time period for the civil rights movement back in the 1960s, 1950s and 60s. So here we go. It's called "We Shall Overcome." So let's sing together. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And you know what? We're all hoping that that day will be sooner rather than later. But we're so excited that Dr. Martin Luther King was such a great figure in that civil rights movement back then, and still quite the figure now, because even years and years after he's gone, we're still commemorating him on this Monday every year. So I think it's really great. And now let's read A Picture Book of Martin Luther King Jr. by David A. Adler, illustrated by Robert Casilla. By the way, I do recognize we've made lots of strides since then. I mean, definitely, integration in schools has been a thing. There have been so many things, you know, uh, in the workplace, in our personal lives. There have been so many strides that have been made, but there still need to be so many more, and I don't think anyone needs to overlook that fact. So that's all that I meant by saying that we still have a ways to go. This book is published by Holiday House in New York. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's greatest leaders. He was a powerful speaker, and he spoke out against laws which kept Black people out of many schools and jobs. He led protests and marches demanding fair laws for all people. And it's because of his and many others' efforts that we have a lot of the freedoms that we have today. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's father was a pastor. His mother had been a teacher. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. Young Martin liked to play baseball, football, and basketball. He liked to ride his bicycle and to sing. He often sang in his father's church. So that's Martin in the center here, and his brother Alfred and his sister Willie singing in the church choir. Young Martin played in the backyard with his friends. One day he was told that two of his friends would no longer play with him because they were white and he was Black. Martin cried. He didn't understand why the color of his skin should matter to anyone. Martin's mother told him that many years ago, Black people were brought in chains to America and sold as slaves. She told him that long before Martin was born, the slaves had been set free. However, there were still some people who did not treat Black people fairly. In Atlanta, where Martin lived, and elsewhere in the United States, there were white only signs. Black people were not allowed in some parks, pools, hotels, restaurants, and even schools. Blacks were kept out of many jobs. Martin learned to read at home before he was old enough to start school. All through his childhood, he read books about Black leaders like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and George Washington Carver. Martin was a good student. He finished high school 2 years early and was just 15 when he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta. At college, Martin decided to become a minister. After Martin was graduated from Morehouse, he studied for a doctorate at Boston University. While he was there, he met Coretta Scott. She was studying music. They fell in love and got married. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. began his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The next year, Rosa Parks, a black woman, was arrested in Montgomery. She had been sitting just behind the white-only section on a bus. When all the seats in the section were taken, the driver told her to get up so a white man could have her seat. Rosa Parks refused. Dr. Martin Luther King led a protest. Blacks throughout the city refused to ride the buses. Dr. King said, "There comes a time when people get tired of being kicked about." It was about time for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to take a stand. One night, while Dr. King was at a meeting, someone threw a bomb into his house. Martin's followers were angry. They wanted to fight. Martin told them to go home peacefully. "We must love our white brothers," he said. "We must meet hate with love." We heard that in the last book, right? The bus protest lasted almost a year. When it ended, there were no more white-only sections on buses. Dr. King decided to move back to Atlanta in 1960. There, he continued to lead peaceful protests against white-only waiting rooms, lunch counters, and restrooms. He led many marches for freedom. In 1963, Dr. King led the biggest march of all, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 black and white people followed him. "I have a dream," he sang in his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." The next year, in 1964, Dr. King was awarded one of the greatest honors any person can win, the Nobel Peace Prize. The country was changing. New laws were passed. Blacks could go to the same school as whites. They could go to the same stores, restaurants, and hotels. White-only signs were against the law. Wow, persistence pays off. Dr. King told his followers to protest peacefully, but there were some riots and some violence. Then in April 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee. He planned to march so black and white garbage workers could get the same pay for the same work. I feel like that's reasonable. On April 4th in Memphis, Dr. King stood outside his motel room. Another man, James Earl Ray, was hiding nearby. He pointed a rifle at Dr. King. He fired the gun. An hour later, Dr. King was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world free of hate, prejudice, and violence. Carved on the stone which marks his graves are the words, "I'm free at last." And for those of you who know of the speech, you know that in this very famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he ends with those words, "Free at last, free at last." Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. And it's very great to see it come full circle on his grave. Okay, so these are the books that we read today. My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Martin Luther King Jr. III, illustrated by A.G. Ford, and The Picture Book of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by David A. Adler, illustrated by Robert Casilla. Thank you so much for joining me today to speak about this wonderful, amazing figure in our history. And now, my goodbye song. We wave goodbye like this. We wave goodbye like this. With our friends at Storytime, we wave